I'm Matt Carpenter.
And I'm Peg Keough.
Welcome to the College Podcast. We are going to be your ultimate guides in helping you figure out how to navigate this maze in such a way that you don't lose your minds or your wallets. Let's get started. Hi, Peggy.
How's it going, Carpy?
Going good, buddy. We're doing good. Do you want to share your personal news with everyone again or no? Not this time.
No, I don't. But I will share what I'm going to share because I thought about this a lot over the week is, I'm always preaching, or maybe not preaching, but trying to encourage our audience and sharing to be helpful and supportive. Don't catastrophize, right? All this stuff that's going on, and it's easy to go, oh, this and this and this and this awful thing around all this college stuff. Well, I caught myself because I'm making a life change, and I caught myself catastrophizing. And I thought to myself, you know what, Peg? I had to sit back and say, you're telling all these wonderful parents not to catastrophize, so you need to take your own advice. It was a not humbling, but it was a bit of a reflective moment for me to say, this goes not just in the college planning space, but everywhere, right? It's just a good way of being. Just wanted to share that what I share with others, I really try and when I'm coaching others, I'm coaching myself, that kind of thing. So
it's a good share because a lot of times it's easier said than done, of course, and easy for us to say when we're not in it. But now, again, I think I know that we care about this so much that it does emotionally impact us, right? Even though it's not our kids right now and it's not our money right now, we are as invested as we possibly can be, given that we're not, living and breathing it at the time. Right. But it's funny, I was going to ask you almost to pick me up a little bit because I'm like, I am, and to your point around, heeding your own advice, I've been trying to latch on to this, thing I heard recently of what could go right. I've been having a little bit of a hard time with it recently, and not just as it applies to all the news in higher education, our sweet spot. A lot of the stuff that you hear coming out is just hard to remain optimistic, I guess, right? Kindly, because you're going, oh my God, what if this happens and what if that happens? So again, to your point, I was trying to be like, I almost had to do one of those calibrations myself to be like, hey, what could go right here, right? It's not all gonna go horrible. The sky's not falling, even though some of these things are not, it's hard to find a separate
mindset across the board. It's just it's very powerful, and we can all control our mindset. And like me, sometimes I fall off the wagon, but then I catch myself and say, yeah, no, got to stop doing that. You get to stop doing that and look at things a different way. So yeah, and we might have some people listening to us, Matt, who are like, you've lost your job. Maybe you're a federal worker. I mean, it's hard. And it's hard to see the forest through the trees and where this is going to end up. And so it's really difficult. So
no question. Well, I think it's important because again, that that's not all bullshit, right? No matter what the adversity is, what the challenge is, trying to always come back to the healthy mindset is.
Well, yeah, and you meet people like I just had a massage last weekend, and my masseuse, like we're just like buddies, and we chat all the time. And she just had this horrific a bunch of events last December, an accident, and then the dog, and then this, and her mother, and she was just like, I had to sit back and go, did I manifest some of this? Why did I have all this happen? And just, she was so inspiring to me, just the way she was talking to me about my thing. And I was just like, and then she texted me after, and it's just so powerful, even to like show up that way for somebody who's got some stuff that's been thrown at them that's hard. So it's really being around people like that is really positive for everybody too.
While you were getting a massage, I was working, trying to provide value for my company, my family, and the greater good of Americans trying to, afford college in this.
Well, and also we need to say, hope everybody had a great St. Patrick's Day as well. I have my green on still today, if you're actually watching us.
Peggy, I'm a little bit ashamed to say, I don't know, it could go either way. I didn't have one drink yesterday, and I was saying it's probably been over 20 years, maybe 25 years since we almost went down to the Anchor and had corned beef dinner down there, and ultimately we didn't. So I'm gonna make up
We
for it. I
had
promise
corned
you that.
beef and cabbage, and it's my hubby's birthday on top of it, and he's very Irish. I'm not as much, but I am Irish. But yeah, we had corned beef, and I did have a drink. I did
Good
have
for you.
some Jameson, so
Good for you,
it was,
Peggy.
I had my cocktail. So,
Thank you for
anyways,
thank you for picking up the slack. Okay, so let's talk. Kind of quick agenda items here. We're going to talk. Major announcement happened since the last time that we recorded together. 50% of the Department of Education's workforce laid off. Immediately after that, we saw some fallout with the FAFSA. May or may not be related. We'll talk about that. Harvard made a big announcement to some of their financial aid policy changes. There was some also Harvard is a part of this, but there's some changes in how endowments at some of these colleges that have bigger endowments are going to be taxed. Talk about that, and then
maybe, yeah, yeah.
if we have time, we'll talk about some of the layoffs that are happening at some specific institutions. But why don't you catch us up on the news, Peggy, for those that didn't kind of hear exactly what happened and what we're seeing set.
Yeah, so when we recorded last week, it was actually that day. So on March 11th, so a week back from today, not a huge surprise, but they laid off, like you said. This is the exact quote from Linda McMahon, who's the Secretary of Education now in the Trump administration. Today's reduction in force reflects the Department of Ed's commitment to efficiency, accountability, and ensuring that resources are directed where they matter most, to students, parents, and teachers. I appreciate the work of the dedicated public servants and their contributions to the department. This is a significant step forward to restoring the greatness of the United States education system. The Department of Ed will continue to deliver all statutory programs that fall under the agency's purview, including formula funding, student loans, Pell Grants, funding for special needs students, and competitive grant making. All divisions are impacted by the reduction, with some divisions requiring significant reorganization to better serve students, parents, educators, and taxpayers. So I wanted to share that with everybody, and that where I said they'll continue to deliver on all statutory programs. So, because I know that's a big worry for people that different things are going to immediately go away. This statement is saying that's not happening. As we've talked about before, they've thrown out that different pieces of what the department does will go under different other agencies, like maybe under the Treasury. They've talked about different places where these things are going to go, but it was reduced to 2,000 people, so about half cut. Federal student aid lost over 300 people, so that's the specific part of the department that deals with, the FAFSA, and that doesn't include the non-union workers. That was just the union workers. Student loan experts, technology specialists, and people who investigate colleges to make sure they're following the rules. A lot of those people were dismissed. So I don't know if we have no way of knowing, Matt and I, if that was deliberate or, this administration has been criticized widely for, making cuts across the board with a hatchet or a chainsaw as opposed to a scalpel, is the terminology that's been used. So I know that President Trump stepped back at one point and said, yeah, I hear you, and actually used that language to say we're going to be more using a scalpel. Hopefully some of this was done that way. I don't know exactly all of that level of detail, but that's what happens. As we said last time, department's smaller, there's less people to help. And some of you that maybe have older kids, the FAFSA, a new FAFSA came out in 24-25. It was a complete train wreck as far as the rollout from a tech standpoint. They brought people in from the outside, really did a good job in 25-26. There were snags, but there's always snags with technology. But it was way, way better, not even in the same universe. So ironically, as Matt said, the next day, Wednesday of last week, the FAFSA went down for quite a while. We have a team of experts at CAP, and we help families with this stuff. And we were all slacking, saying, hey, could you get in the FAFSA? It was down for a bunch of hours. They did get it back up. They said it wasn't really related to that. It is quite a coincidence that the FAFSA has been very good. hasn't had a big outage like that, and then it was down. So
Yeah, I mean,
that
look,
yeah,
my
go
thought
ahead
on
and yeah,
well,
chime
my
in
thought
here.
on that, so I have a couple thoughts here. I mean, that would be quite ironic if the FAFSA just so happened to have its first kind of major glitch of this season, right? Just within 24 hours of half of, or with a lot of these folks being laid off, and specifically some of the tech folks, right? My personal opinion here, I have no, inside baseball knowledge. My personal opinion is that is not, it is very much related to what happened here. Okay. And I think it's one of two things, right? We see this all the time, right? At the end of the day, we're a tech company. So we know that any number of every day there's different glitches and bugs that come up, and you have to have programmers that are all over it, right? To make sure that everything's working the way that it should. And so we know we've seen this happen when we have a programmer on vacation or extra glitches in one day or whatever, and we'll have similar challenges, right? So it could just very well be that there were glitches, and all of a sudden they're short staffed that day and they can't get to these bugs, and you have this kind of complete shutdown of the FAFSA. That's possibility A. The other one, I was kind of snickering when it happened. I'm like, oh, do we have a disgruntled individual that wants to turn something off here? I don't know, right? Again, complete speculation, but I wonder if somebody was pissed and was like, you know what? I'm not going out here quietly.
Yeah, I wouldn't, just my gut. It wasn't that because I did read in a few places like developers and IT staff were hit hard with these layoffs. And technically, they're not laid off until the 1st of March. But they had most of these departments, USAID, they come in and they take away their access. So they might not be laid off on paper yet, but they don't have the access they had the day before to actually get in there. But they even said one of the places I was reading, like a bunch of them jumped on a Teams call and they were really like doing their best to figure out what was going on in spite of it. I think most of the department is really, they're pro family, they're pro getting these kids what they need, right? And in spite of all this stuff. So, but my gut is it's more, yeah, there's when you let go of half of a department, I mean, obviously there's upheaval, right? And they're doing things. There's a form that's out, so
I,
but the good news is it was up. I don't know how long it was down. It wasn't down for like half a day. It was down for hours, but they got it back up. And I haven't heard from our team. I don't know about you, Matt. Since then, it's been smooth,
I
so
think
whatever that
it's back.
issue.
No issues since that hiccup. I tend
Yeah.
to agree with you. I don't think I want to start rumors here, but I was just kind of being like, I wonder if somebody, it's certainly possible. We know it is possible where somebody could say, you know what, you think I'm useless? Well, how about this? Right. And they don't want to
Yeah.
leave quietly. So
I think most of the, I
no,
mean,
right.
yeah, I know some people in the department and they're like the opposite. It's like in spite of being laid off, we're still going to go the extra mile for families and students because that's why they're there in the first place. They're not there because they're making millions of dollars, right? They're federal employees, they're public servants, they're trying to, pay it forward. So,
Let me ask you about this, Peggy, because one, I mean, first of all, I get a just ton of, compassion and empathy for these people that just lost their jobs out of nowhere. They get the rug pulled out from underneath them and just sucks, right? There's no six. That's it. But I wonder, because one, I forget which politician was just railing these layoffs, was vehemently against it, and specifically cited these folks that are in kind of oversight, right? That are making sure that colleges aren't, preying on families, and said, hey, these people were the ones that shut down these predatory for-profit colleges, and they're still the ones that are making sure. And again, my initial reaction to that was when all that stuff was happening. This is several years ago now, with for-profit colleges, they're finding out kind of how corrupt they are, and a lot of these getting shut down. Again, even then I was like, well, I know a lot of, nonprofit colleges that aren't a ton better and are still pretty stinking aggressive with their marketing, and their admissions counselors are not called salespeople, but that's basically what they are. And basically what came up for me was, because a lot of times we've said this, like, there's no real watchdog, there's no real police that's saying, hey, are these colleges actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they making sure that families are making good decisions here? Because in our experience, that has been a deficit for a long time, and we've considered ourselves to be in that role, right? Trying to hold these folks accountable. So again, all that's to say, when I saw some of those layoffs, I was like, huh, I wonder how effective they were to begin with, or, again, I think you know where I'm going here, but I don't know if you share a similar sentiment or not in terms of,
Wait, so tell me what your final
what I'm
point is
thinking
that you're
is,
trying to make.
my thought was, I don't think there has been effective oversight to hold colleges accountable to make sure that they are conducting business the way they say they conduct business. Do you meet 100% in need? If you're an institutional methodology school, do you actually not look at step parents' income and assets the way that you're supposed to? Not right. Examples like this. Are you trying to make sure that families are putting themselves in a position to have a successful outcome at the end of this, right? So
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
basically, I was saying this, in my experience, was not an effective department that I could see. Now, again, maybe I'm missing all these things, and we're going to see fallout. I don't know, but anyways, I was like less concerned about those.
Yeah, I think my thing would be in response to that is what exactly is the mandate of the department? What are they supposed to really be overseeing? Because what you're describing, that's a lot. That's a lot for them to do that for what, 2,000, 3,000 institutions in this country to hold them accountable. But your point is well taken. Just even if we just talk about net price calculators, like they said, what it was it 2010, hey, you guys all have to have transparency with families, you need to have these net price calculators on your website, and then they produce a federal template. Hey, well, if you want to use ours, and it was meaningless. Basically, it didn't ask nearly enough for a family to get an output that would give them any transparency. So it was kind of, and then they did it and there's no oversight of it. So that's a big thing we talk about, that they're not, colleges don't need to keep them up to date and they're not doing anything wrong because there's no oversight. So if you take that as an example, that's an example to me of the government making a regulation that had a good spirit behind it. That's our big thing at CAP, is like transparency, be advocates for families. And they were trying to do that, but they threw that out there and it wasn't done very well. So we deal with daily, right? That deal. So daily with, hey, it doesn't match what we say, and many of their calculators are just not right at these colleges. And that was a federal, not program, but initiative that they told them to do. So I see what you're saying. I just don't, I mean, I can't imagine that their mandate was to like every little school, exactly how are you calculating need for all these
And I'm sure
families?
it wasn't, right? I'm sure it wasn't any right, and I'm probably just being, I don't know, wishful thinking, right? And but that's a great example, right? In net price calculators, for those of you who might be hearing that phrase for the first time, it's essentially the point of it is that before a family applies to a particular college, they can use this calculator on the school's website to get an idea what they would actually pay. Would they get financial aid? Would they get scholarships? What's their true net cost if they were to be accepted at that college? Great concept. That's a huge part of what we do. But to Peg's point, the execution largely stinks. Some colleges are pretty good, but again, it was this good idea that never got enforced, right? And you can still, a college can be within the rules of the game by using a net price calculator from 2008. They just have to have one on their website, but it doesn't matter how misleading it might actually be. That's a perfect example, and that's what I'm talking about, of like, hey, what were these guys doing anyways? Which again is probably unfair, maybe a little bit ignorant on my part, but
Seems like you got up on, I got out of bed today thinking, I'm not pro Department of Ed. I'm not saying the government, doesn't need to make some changes. I'm all for that, but
yeah, well, no, I don't mean that, and maybe I'm coming across that way. I don't know, but and again, of course, I'm just oversimplifying here, going, hey, what did those guys do anyways? And again, that's probably speaking to my ignorance. Hopefully I am, I don't know, I guess hopefully I'm proven correct, because if there's going to be a whole lot less oversight and parents are going to even be less well off and there's going to be less transparency, our jobs got harder.
yeah,
Um,
I would love that if they would get more into that piece of it instead of some of the other things they're trying to do for at the schools, but get more transparent, because that's, we both know that's the biggest problem. And if you're a parent and you've even dabbled in this space, you know how a mom called it a couple years ago, how opaque this all is, and it would be great if the government was a big part of like taking that away, then families could be more in the driver's seat instead of the colleges, behind these murky policies slash business plans about how they award aid if they do. So
Yep. All right, Peggy, let's hit on our next bullet here. So tell us what Harvard just announced and your thoughts.
Yeah, so Harvard just announced, and you've probably heard this before, change and I just used the term business plan, and we like to use that term because most of these colleges are nonprofits, but they truly have business plans. They have ways that they're making their revenue, their net revenue, if you will. So they announced that families that make up to 200,000 a year will have free tuition. And the one thing to point out, if you're brand new to this, is there's something called the cost of attendance. That's the whole enchilada. That's the cost for a year. That includes tuition and fees, room and board, books, travel, and usually a line item they call personal expenses. So, but tuition at Harvard, I'm rounding up, it's about 57,000. So they're saying if you make up to 200,000, which is a nice piece of change, right? Your tuition's going to be free. If you make 100,000 or less, it's all free. The one thing that I did a little digging yesterday and I didn't find, but I want to share with everybody listening is this is not the first school to do this. Harvard's already done this. They're just changing the numbers. UPenn, a lot of these selective schools do this, right? But a lot of times what they say in the fine print is that income with quote unquote reasonable asset. And I went digging, I went on the Harvard site. The Harvard Gazette is where I was getting my info because I'm like, all right, that's their newspaper or their whatever they call it instead of going on third party sites. And I didn't spend hours, full disclosure, but I spent some time looking and I didn't see anything about that. The reason why that matters is sometimes in the past, when schools have done this, when you look at the fine print, those reasonable assets, that's what matters because there could be somebody who's retired who isn't making tons of money anymore, but they've amassed a certain amount of non-retirement assets because they've been working their whole life and maybe they retired at 62, but they have kids that are going into college. And it's like, oh, but you have this amount of assets. Well, that's over our cap. So you don't qualify for the free tuition or everything being free. So I just want to make sure that all the listeners understand that's something to, check that box to make sure that there isn't anything about that. I mean, my take on this, it's wonderful, right? For the families that can get this is wonderful. And 200,000 that's a nice living. I mean, certain parts of the country, it sounds crazy, but it's a nice living. But if you have 3 kids and they're doing activities, you might be just getting by, different parts of the country, other parts, you're probably banking a lot of money. But the key thing around all of this is understanding these schools. And I know you're going to talk about this, Matt, so I won't dig into it too much, but it's great to hear that. And I think I read 85% or 80% of kids get financial aid at Harvard, and people will hear that and say, oh, well, that's huge. We'll definitely be getting it. And that's not a good assumption to make. You have to get in the weeds and you have to understand that school and how they do things and how they look at your family before you do the digging. But before you make that assumption, but this announcement, the key thing is, are assets involved? Because routinely, I think a couple years ago, I was visiting my mom in North Carolina, and I think it was Duke or a school, don't quote me, came out and said, but if you make this, and sure enough, right when I did some digging, it usually says that reasonable assets. That's like kind of the devil in the details with this stuff that you have to make sure you're looking up. Because if you're someone who's fortunate enough to have a nice portfolio, it might not be applicable to you. So you just want to know that.
Yep. So this is a Harvard bar. What movie is that from, Peggy?
I don't know. What
This is
movie?
the Harvard bar. I figured there'd be equations and shit on the
Oh,
wall.
is that from Good Will Hunting?
That a girl. You had me nervous
Nice.
for a second. Yeah, so look, in my experience, Harvard's probably the most generous school in the country. I've seen that firsthand. We get the privilege of working with these extraordinary kids that get into Harvard and schools of the like every year, and I think they walk the walk, right? And they're one of the few schools that has their own kind of unique formula. Their formula benefits consumers more than any other school that I've had experience with, right? And there's a couple other schools that are close to the Harvards, but in my
When you
opinion,
say formula, tell people what you mean just so they
so I mean,
understand.
in terms of and good point, right? So Peggy talked about the cost of attendance, their sticker price, right? That's, let's call it 100 grand because they're pretty close. Okay, Harvard and Harvard's alike. Student aid index, right? So that's the dollar amount that gets assigned to a family when you apply for financial aid. So when they look at your income, when they look at your assets, right? Those being the two biggest drivers, they come up with a dollar amount. Okay, and there's a standard federal formula. There's a standard formula for what are called the institutional methodology schools. And then each individual college has the option of having kind of their own way that they calculate that student aid index, that dollar amount. Okay. The way that Harvard calculates that student aid index, that dollar amount that you pay, works in consumers' favor in such a way that is unique from really any other college. And that's the ticket there, right? Because if we have a lower cost, or if we have a lower student aid index, especially at the colleges that are meeting 100% of need, which I'll unpack in a second here, that means we're only going to pay our student aid index. So if Harvard says that our student aid index is $10,000, who cares if they're 100,000? They meet 100% of need, which is the difference between our student aid index and the cost of attendance. In other words, if our student aid index is less than the cost of attendance, that's what we pay to go to that school. That's what we pay to go to Harvard, right? So that's that's a lot to say of what they do well. Quite frankly, they don't do well enough. Okay, in my opinion, as generous as they are, I just said a lot of nice things about them. I mean, all of them, and they're true. They have a $50 billion, right? So they can, are they doing a good job? They are, and they're the leaders in the clubhouse. I think they can do even more, right? Because who and again, I don't, we shouldn't cry for these people, but I'm thinking of some actual people, Peggy, that live in Manhattan, make $350,000, have 3 kids, and again, that's it's amazing to make $350,000. You know, and again, there's a certain amount of choice of living in the most expensive city in the world, right?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean,
Exactly, right. You
even
might
in
have
Jersey, it's expensive too, where I grew up. So if
exactly,
that's
but
where the
you know where
job
I'm going
is,
with this. You can make 350 grand and have, you know, 3 kids and be renting in New York City and have no savings and no retirement. You might pay 100 grand to go to Harvard or pretty close, right? So again, I think they can do even better. Now, again, they're still the leader in the clubhouse. They deserve credit. But I think related to this conversation is that a lot of times when families are going to tour schools, and for those of you that haven't yet, especially at some of these more prestigious campuses, you're going to hear some kind of buzzwords. And a big one is we meet 100% of need. We meet 100% of need. We give $60,000 on average. The average student pays this, right? This is where we need to be careful. Okay. Number one, whenever a school starts talking about what the average student pays here, plug your ears. Okay. Because unless you're the average, that's irrelevant. It's a distraction. Okay.
well, and what does average even mean? Like they don't define that, right?
100%, right? It's like you got to disregard that. You need to find out what are you gonna pay, okay? And I think that's something that's really interesting here. And we had our data team do some digging over the last week. Was for these colleges that meet 100% of need, do they, right? And we got a pretty long list back of some that do not. Okay, that claim they do. And when I say they do not, I mean because we have the data, we have actual offers from these institutions, and we also know the financial situation of these families. So we know their SAIs. Okay, so here's some schools that say they meet 100% of need that according to a lot of data we have, do not consistently, or not for everybody. Brown, Boston College, Northeastern, Northwestern, Duke, Tufts, Barnard, Middlebury, Cornell. Sorry, Peggy, Cornell's on there.
Oh, that's
But
okay.
now, again, it's kind of easy for colleges to defend themselves here because they could say, well, we calculate the SAI differently. It's easy for them to move the goalposts a little bit, and we do meet 100% of need. But and this is where it gets just so uh,
Opaque.
opaque and nuanced, right? And I actually think Duke is an interesting one on here, and I'm gonna reserve judgment before I put them on the naughty list because I'm wondering if they were kind of looking at the old net price calculator. A really cool win we had with Duke a few months ago is that we had this family, the student wanted to apply early decision, and we had projected that they were going to pay $10,000 at Duke or thereabouts, right? And so the family was thrilled. We're going all in. We're applying early decision. And right before They did Duke's net price calculator on their website, and Duke told them they were paying $50,000. A monumental spread. They were out of their minds, so pissed at us, MF and us. I had to talk to both, and I was dying on the hill saying, I looked at it. I said, no, I feel great about our projections. I get your level of discomfort but I'm standing behind these. Well, what we found out was that Duke no longer considers home equity against families. So in other words, if you own your home and you have a lot of equity in your home, Duke used to hold that against you. They no longer do. Okay. And this family had a lot of equity in their home, and it was really their only asset. So their calculator counted that against them and made the difference with $40,000. So we hounded their office, right? We hounded Duke's financial aid office, and finally they said, you know what, guys, you're right. Our thing is outdated. To their credit.
To
Okay.
their credit. Yeah, you got to give them kudos for that.
They
Yep.
deserve it. That right away, they said, that's our bad. Thank you for pointing that out. They fixed it within 24 hours. The family ran the night price calculator again. Lo and behold, boom, $10,000. Let's go. Everybody's thrilled. So, I went off the rails with that story a little bit, but I think it's important just to understand how these one variable can make such a huge difference on whether or not a college is going to be affordable for your family. And it's up to us to figure out what are the right schools for my kid based on our situation, again, when it comes to this affordability piece, right?
Yeah, so I think your point is really well taken. When you hear the school meets 100% of need, that's lovely. But the next question you should be thinking is, what's my need at your school? How are you calculating it? How are you looking at my home equity? Are you even looking at it? I'm divorced. Are you looking at both parents? There's all these nuances, and the schools are not all the same. That's what makes this hard. And they can look at one student a little bit differently than another student. They can. They're giving out their money and they can do that. The more you know about it and you reach out in the right way to the colleges, I mean, both of us, and no, you have too, Matt. I've had success stories where it brings tears to my eyes. I'm like, wow, look how this college came to the table because we chatted with them. And then I've seen schools that are just like, nope, we're not playing ball. And it's like, that's where if you have a bunch of choices, then you're more in the driver's seat and you can make that decision. I would just throw this out as advice too. If you're starting to think about this with your kids and where they might want to go, cast a wide net and don't get emotionally set on a specific school. Because I've been through this times too. And honestly, the school doesn't matter nearly as much as finding a place where your kid's going to thrive. Because if your kid goes, I don't care, goes to Harvard, Princeton, and that's not where they really belong, they're not going to leverage everything. They're not going to blossom into who they're supposed to blossom into. Whereas maybe they go to University of Wisconsin, Madison, go Badgers, and that's where they belong, right? It's not about rankings. It's not about any of that. And I know I'm going on a little tangent, but I believe this. My kids are perfect examples. A Hoosier IU graduate and a James Madison Go Dukes graduate, and they're changing the world in their own little ways, or big ways, little ways, and they're supporting themselves. Just a lot of things that you might not see every Harvard graduate doing, right? They might be trying to figure out their life. So just keep all of that in mind as we're talking through all this stuff as well.
And if your kid gets into Harvard, go there no matter what. Remortgage.
No, I don't agree with that.
Again, another podcast. I agree with everything you said, Peggy, except for the Harvard part. But something I want to add to this conversation is very much relevant. I think it's within the same kind of context in terms of these schools that meet 100% of need, which again is largely a good thing. That means they are generous with need-based financial aid. So let's be clear. In every school that I mentioned, I know that it was within a negative context. We've seen them give amazing financial aid awards to families, and especially families with less resources. We've seen every single one of those schools I mentioned be more affordable than the in-state state school, for where that student is applying from. So yes, I'm giving them a little bit of a hard time for not always conducting business the way that they hold themselves out to. And again, we have the evidence to support that. These are, again, on the whole, very generous schools if our SAI is low enough, right? And they do, what they say they should be doing. But a lot of these colleges, okay, that are within the same ilk as some of the ones that I just mentioned. We're seeing this thing more and more popular. Our buddies at Notre Dame just did it, Peggy. They're no loan schools, right? No loan schools. And that is for me, this particular one is more marketing gimmick than it is substance. Okay. Because a lot of families that we send to these types of schools, when they say no loan, they mean when we give you your financial aid package, it's going to be all need-based grants, right? All free money. We're not going to include, like 99% of colleges do, this $5,500 federal direct student loan freshman year, right? And then it goes up a little bit each year. And that's a great thing to put on your brochure. It's a great thing to be able to say, but a lot of families go to these schools, they still need to borrow. And that's the best loan, the best place to start. But unbeknownst to them, they have to go out of their way to ask for that directly and say, hey, we're entitled to it, right? But the schools don't like to include it because, again, it's not good for their statistics. But the families actually need it. So again, that's one of these things where it's a nice sentiment. And there is some substance where it might increase their need-based grants a little bit, but I largely think this is a marketing gimmick. And it actually, in my opinion, hurts more people than it helps, in the sense that families that need to borrow don't know that this option is still available to them, and it happens to be the best option. So what are your thoughts on it, Peggy?
I think when people hear that, and when Notre Dame announced that a while ago, I had families saying to me, "Oh, great. So that means I don't need to take out any loans." And I'm like, "No, that's not what it means. It means if you're eligible for this subsidized loan, Notre Dame's saying, hey, they're going to kick in that 3,500 from their resources instead of giving you that, but you're going to still owe money. And if you don't have that money, you're still going to have to figure out where it should be." And to your point, Matt, many times the direct federal loan is the best place to go. And you do have to reach out and say, hey, can you put that on there? So again, I think it sounds really great, but people that don't understand all the nuances, which a lot of families don't. It's a lot to understand. That's why we exist, to try and educate people and support you. Yeah, it sounds great, but you got to dig in and see what that really means and how it's going to help. Some families might not help you at all, right? If you're not eligible for those loans. So, the subsidized version. But yeah, it sounds lovely, and it sounds like that's what most people said to me after. Well, great. Now I'm not going to have any loans, Peg. I said, no, that's not what that means.
Exactly. And you can see where they're easily confused, and it can be a little bit misleading and counterintuitive when you learn what that actually means, right? So last thing, Peggy, and maybe we'll just spend a minute on this before we say bye, but updates in terms of how endowments are gonna be taxed.
So, and this is not a done deal, but they're throwing this out there. And I thought it was super interesting as I dug into this. So, Matt mentioned like the two biggest ones, I think. Harvard's got about 51 billion, a mere 51 billion, and Yale's not that far behind in the mid to high 40 billions of endowment. So these guys are all nonprofits, most of them. Some universities, colleges aren't, but the lion's share are nonprofits. So what it's been now is that there's a tax of 1.4%, but a lot of colleges don't pay that. The way they do it is they look at your endowment, they divide it by the enrollment, and if that comes out to over $500,000 per kid for that endowment, then you're subject to the tax. So Harvard and Yale are, right? They're smaller schools. They have massive endowments. But for example, Columbia, you would all think, well, of course, they're paying that, right? They're not, because they're a much bigger school and their endowment is a mere 15 billion. So it's piddly squat. I'm kidding, right? But compared to Harvard and Yale, it's much smaller, but their enrollment is much higher. So they don't pay the tax at all. So that was interesting. That's interesting. But what's being thrown out there by the vice president right now, Vance, is let's raise that to 35%. Obviously, massive increase. It's not, the Congress isn't discussing this yet, but it's just being thrown out there. But it's another piece of the puzzle where there's pressure on these colleges and universities where money could be going out the door, with all the federal funding they're talking about cutting, and they're talking about an endowment tax. So that's out there. And so we just wanted to bring it up and explain that, like colleges, which aren't that many, that are tiny, like less than 500 kids, they would never pay the tax. So a lot of schools, because their endowment is in the millions or whatever, they don't pay any tax. And I didn't read anywhere that they want every school to do this. That would be really difficult for some schools that aren't even on the radar to pay this if they start taxing every school. So we'll see. I don't think it's a huge, top of the line initiative, but it's getting press. It's out there. So we'll see what happens with that.
It's interesting, and I think it makes sense. It's in the sense of like, okay, the most crass way that I've heard some colleges like these be referred to is, they're hedge funds that don't pay taxes, right?
Well, they truly are invested like a hedge fund, and the
Yeah,
people that are managing, I've read books these guys write. I mean,
yeah.
they're top of the, first in class here. So
So it seems to me there's an opportunity, and again, to your point, I don't think that in the grand scheme of things and making higher education affordable for everybody, I don't know how much this is going to do to move the needle, but I think it makes sense and is just kind of common sense to just take a look at this, right? And maybe there's some opportunities there for the greater good in such a way that it's not unfair to these schools that are going to be.
would be nice that the wealthy universities kick in a little bit more.
Yeah, I
Like
like the
you and
concept.
I have to pay, like, there is a bit of unfairness in our tax system. Like Warren Buffett says, he pays less tax than his secretary pays.
Right.
Like there's something obviously majorly wrong with that scenario.
Agreed, 100%, and I think that sentiment is a good one to just explore, right, and take a look at. So, okay, Peggy, I guess in closing, let's see if we can let's challenge one another here. What can be right? Lead us out on an optimistic note. What could go right here? What could go right, given all this stuff? And I can go first if you want to think about it for a second.
I got an idea. I
All
don't
right,
want you to take my idea.
go.
So what could go right is I personally think there is room for more efficiency in the government, and there's definitely waste. Companies have it, the government has it. And so when I try and think positively about this, maybe some of these changes will get us to a place where some of these agencies are a little heavy and we don't need as much as we have. It's the way they're doing it. I don't like at all. And certain agencies like the veterans really, really bothers me. But maybe at the end of the day, when they bring some of the people back, and then maybe it'll level set to like, okay, this is who we need in the government to make it work efficiently. I wish they weren't going about it the way they are, but that could go right. That some of these cuts are needed and are done correctly at some point, that could go
No,
right.
I like it. I like it, right? I mean, again, I hope and I think that people aren't like trying to make things worse for the greater good, right? God willing, those are not the intentions of the powers that be. And I don't think they are, right? They're doing what they think is the right thing to move most of us forward. So, what I'll say is that my hope is that we know historically some of the most dangerous language that people can have when it comes to paying for college and the affordability is we'll figure it out, right? Those are the famous last words. And we'll figure it out leads to $1.8 trillion in debt. No, you don't figure it out. And my neighbor figured it out. My brother-in-law figured it out. Oh, our peers the year. Well, no, they didn't. They didn't, right? And people have this naivete that maybe, the government's taking care of us and the colleges are taking care of us and we're just gonna be on cruise control and get on the assembly line. And again, it's just gonna spit out this good end result, right? And that mindset is a very dangerous one and is a huge part of why we're just in the position we're in when it comes to college affordability and debt, etc. So my hope is that a lot of this stuff just shakes people like we try to do. Shake people. Wake up, pay attention. You have to take agency. You have to take control. Nobody's coming to the rescue. It is up to you to find out which colleges are going to be affordable. It's up to you to have these conversations with your kids and get on the same page and put together this list of amazing schools that are within or close to your budget. Because if you're just going to float and just kind of quote unquote trust the system, good luck. Right? So,
Yeah.
anyways, I'm
Yeah.
just hoping that maybe this is a consequence that people say, shit, I better start paying attention because nobody's going to do it for me.
Yeah, and that would be just lovely because all the years I've been doing this, it still blows me away that people will hear me say stuff and then they still wait. They still wait. They still wait. I think it's because it's scary and it's like, oh, there's so much going on. I don't want to deal with it. Oh, my kid wants to do this, but and we'll do a whole podcast on this. But like, it's totally possible to go through this process with minimal stress and friction with your kids. It's totally possible. Do you have to make some effort? Sure. most things in life, you put some effort in, you get the fruits of your labors, right? But it is totally possible. And all this stuff people are going through, and then it ends up being all this debt you're talking about, Matt. It truly is avoidable, and loan forgiveness isn't the answer. It's don't even have those massive loans that need to be forgiven so that you haven't put that stress on yourself and your child in the first place. And it's possible. We're lucky in this country. We have a lot of schools, and most kids can get help at a lot of different schools, financial help.
Yep, that's right. And we just got to be proactive about it. So, all right, Peggy, we forgot to say this at the top. Please follow us, guys, wherever you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever else. Please share us
Yeah,
if
share,
you're getting
share,
any
share.
value here. We'd be very grateful. And we will see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Matt.